So let's talk about the truly chilling and shocking conclusion to a story we began last week, which is that I thought you were going to I didn't think you were going to hate Showgirls. I thought you were going to be massively embarrassed by the movie Showgirls.
Okay, so I felt the need to see Showgirls because it has a certain place in culture. It gets mentioned a lot. I knew some people loved it. I knew a lot of people hated it, or at least didn't like it. I knew that
it was terrible.
I knew that it has a place in culture, and I was like, in this documentary called You Don't Nomi, Nomi, the name of the character in Showgirls, Nomi, came out, I think last year, or maybe it was just getting distribution this year. A little confused on that, but it was suddenly noticed. I suddenly noticed it, or you also suddenly noticed it. And so it was like, well, let's watch. I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. It sounds like a Los Angeles place itself kind of thing. So let's do a documentary video essay and let's watch Showgirls beforehand because I'd never seen it.
Right.
And I fucking loved Showgirls.
I know, I can't. But okay, so do you want to talk about how you loved it first, and then I'm going to throw out a little bit of my hindsight realizations.
Yes. So the setup for this, two bits of setup for this. A reminder that we spoil things.
Right.
And so Showgirls is about a woman named Nomi who catches a ride into Vegas from some guy, and she ends up in Vegas, and she's kind of trying to become like a great dancer, but just a great dancer or something. But she's doing it like through the route of like Showgirls, and that's kind of the synopsis and plot of the movie. And so here's the thing. NC-17 is a rating that is almost never displayed. Like, you don't find NC-17 movies unless they're like porn, I guess. Or at least it's very uncommon. Sometimes you get like an NC-17 cut that's like a director's cut or something. And this movie is NC-17. It's the most money that was spent on an NC-17 movie at that time.
I think it's the only wide release NC-17. I will confirm that while you talk.
And it has the most money spent on it, and it still has, made by Paul Verhoeven, who made RoboCop, and at that point was kind of on a string of, I think, successes of like interesting action movies and stuff.
First and to date only wide release NC-17 movie. So there are other ones, they're just not wide release.
And so there is a lot of nudity in this movie and a lot of sex stuff. I think the sex only happens once or twice, but there's a lot of sex stuff in this movie. And like, I'm watching this movie and it is just absurd. Like, she's like hitchhiking into Vegas, but it just looks kind of funny the way she's doing it. Like, she's almost not holding her thumb right or something. And she's
standing next to a sign that only shows Las Vegas at the destination, and it is 398 miles away. And I suppose if you're out in the boonies somewhere, that might really be the only big city worth mentioning, but there's just something odd about it visually. Like,
yeah, and so she gets picked up, and this guy who picks her up is kind of a character. He looks like an Elvis impersonator or something, except he doesn't quite have the right structure. And meanwhile, as she's interacting with him, it's like it's a 0 where she's doing nothing, a 10 where she's upset, or an 11 where she's angry, and that is it. You get nothing else. And as the movie goes on, that is all you get from her. Oh my God, it is so out there. And like, I'm like, God, this is absurd. But it's like the movie, this hitchhiking into town is like, it's weirdly a good setup. The first 10 or 15 minutes of your movie is supposed to set it up. And I think you or Kirby or someone joked like, oh, this is a great way to set up the movie. And it was satirical.
Well, the first 10, I was taught, the first whatever pages of your book, the first 10 minutes of a movie tells the audience what they're in for.
Right. And you were joking about that because she's hitchhiking into Vegas, and that's the first 10 minutes basically. But I'm like, weirdly, I think it actually is a great setup because like
we weren't joking. No, we were being real because it was just so bonkers.
It was so bonkers, and it's like it's really so. There's this idea. There's all different ways to approach a movie, like realism or absurdism or whatever. It could be. It could be something like Call Me by Your Name, which is really sort of naturalistic and central. It could be something like Roma, which is kind of emotional, but is also really grand, right?
We're comparing Roma to Showgirls, yes.
No, I'm just trying to understand what we're talking about here. And like the setups for those movies, you want to get that kind of setup. And those are different styles. The style for Showgirls is 0, 10, and 11. Like, you're going to get nothing. You're going to get like weird negative shit, or you're going to get like weird positive shit. And that's like it. And it is just dialed that way. Like, I really like Kurosawa films, and Kurosawa does not have naturalism as one of the things he's going for in general.
Yeah.
His movies are very stylized.
Very composed.
Very composed. The acting is never like, the acting is full of people like shouting lines in a way that I mean, some of them are period pieces, so who knows? But probably nobody said a line like that. Nobody ever talked like that. But it doesn't matter, because to me, it fits the verisimilitude, the world that the film is constructing. And Showgirls constructs its bonkers as shit world just off the bat. And so, yeah. And then the rest of the film follows, and it's just like, it was just never not like absurd or crazy or like, it's not even absurd. It just is dialed to, like, it's dialed to, 11, everything. And like, I get annoyed. I have this thing where I like seeing floppy penises in movies, because like, you see boobs all the time. It's like, I forget, some filmmaker somewhere said boobs are the cheapest special effects. And like, so you see boobs in everything. You even get like bush and frontal nudity sometimes a little bit. But like a flaccid penis, you could never see a hard penis, because heaven forbid. And
well,
like,
I think is just, you don't even get an NC-17. I think they just say you cannot.
Yeah, which is dumb, is really dumb. But like, it's like you never see it. And it's like, heaven forbid we see male penis on the screen. And like, Showgirls is like, you see everything and every bit of like everyone. Now it's all women, you don't really, you see a little bit of Kyle.
Yeah, it is pretty female nudity centric.
Oh, it's all female nudity, but it's the same idea where it's like, instead of it being like this titillating special effect that you see boobs, it's just the world. Like, it's not special effects. It just is the movie. And it's so fun to see free sexuality in that way. You never see free sexuality in a movie.
And that was the interesting thing I was going to do my hindsight thing, but first, we watched the documentary, and
after we saw Showgirls.
After we watched Showgirls, we watched
You Don't Nomi.
You Don't Nomi, which was very Room 237. It was critics commenting on, is it good, is it bad? What can we take from it? And one of the best points I liked in that documentary was that we're okay with Verhoeven showing us egregious amounts of violence. Like, RoboCop is super violent, like, and not NC-17, just very, very violent. But when he goes over the top with sexuality, we all kind of like titter, and that was a little bit my thing with Night Porter.
The Night Porter, yeah.
Which is like, I don't mind if people find it objectionable. I just find it interesting that people who are okay with violence and okay with slavery and okay with these other horrible things get their feathers ruffled when sexuality becomes involved. So I thought that was a really interesting take. As someone, that was actually, going back to Variety, something that, as someone who is kind of weirdly fascinated by seeing weird sex stuff, it seems like I get the shade more than, and people have commented that, like, in Europe, you see a lot more nudity and a lot less violence in films. And, it's kind of an American thing to be like pretty down with like lots of blood and gore. But like, I'm going to have to look up. I think it was called The Cooler. So I saw The Cooler back in film school. And interestingly enough, it takes place in Reno. And I remember that we got to see it takes place in Reno. William H. Macy is a cooler. So something about his presence does something with gambling. I can't remember. But Maria Bello is in it. And I remember the director talking about the NC-17 rating. They had a tiny bit of female pubic hair, and that got it an NC-17 rating. And once they got rid of that, it was fine. And it's just stuff like that that's very like,
it's just absurd to me
questionable. So then you see something like Showgirls, which is just like, hey, like throwing it all out there.
Yeah.
And I can understand. And then to go into my hindsight thing, the thing I really realized, I overlooked, I miss, I don't know what word I want here, but I didn't see the situation clearly. You like Pedro Almodovar.
Yes.
You like him more than me.
Yes.
And he also, to me, I hope his feelings don't get hurt by me comparing, like he's paying attention, his films to Showgirls. But he has this kind of over-the-topness to this film.
His films are very melodramatic.
Yeah, but they also feature frequently gay, transgender, lesbian
Pedro Almodovar himself is gay, so.
Yes, but in a very, like, I don't like in your face, because I think that can be used like very poorly,
yeah.
but he shows it very dramatically. They're very kind of dramatic stories. There's people dying and children and women in love with transgender women, and he kind of goes all in. And that is not what I dislike about. I have trouble with the drama. Like, it's a bit much for me.
Yeah.
I love Maurice, and it's by, it's a British story. So there's a lot of people walking into rooms and going, oh, whereas a Pedro Almodovar film is like people running into a room and ripping their clothes off and declaring who they are as people practically, which is not my taste. But I think Showgirls has that same kind of unabashed, glorious, not in your face, but glorious, passionate. Yeah. I'm doing a lot of hand movements if you're listening to this instead of watching. But it just, it's
I agree. I think
unrepressed.
Well, Bob Fosse and we're going another tangent here, but it's related. So I've seen Lenny and is it Chicago? No, not Chicago. Sorry, that's the wrong one. All That Jazz.
Okay.
All That Jazz, which I think is a song in Chicago. Anyways, but the movie All That Jazz. And I think I've seen one other Fosse, but
wasn't he Cabaret? Yeah, he's Cabaret.
Cabaret. And like Cabaret and All That Jazz are very, they're not really as melodramatic or like over the top as what we're talking about, but they are very like glorious and very like outlandish and like outlandish.
Well, it's almost like we were talking earlier about the difference between Moonlight and Call Me by Your Name. Like they both have male bodies in them, but one of them, it's very warm and like you can almost feel the bodies, and the other is kind of like not Kubrick, but it's just very presentational and sculptural.
I almost wonder if there's an aspect to this, like, so Showgirl, there's an aspect to this that I wonder is like, I have this whole thing I'm building in my head. It's not a theory, and I should probably look up if there's actual books or essays or conversation about it, but like, there's the mere act of being yourself can be in defiance of something. Like if you are you're a black non-binary person, that is probably an act of defiance in of itself, even though it shouldn't be. It should just be a person being a person, but it's not, because the world isn't a fair place. And in a weird way, I wonder if there's an aspect of that to these movies, because like, and a part of that I think might even go like a part of Almodovar's films, or Fosse's films are, I mean, they're not really gay or LGBTQIA, but they do have that aspect to them. They're a little more free about the sexuality. Cabaret, and I mean, specifically Cabaret is, but All That Jazz, maybe not as much, I don't know. But like, is there like an aspect of that to it? Because like these movies are about a subject and about a freedom of sexuality in a way that is just by being itself in defiance. So it's almost like you're trying to glorify it and be a little outlandish with it and a little bit like more pronounced, because it's like, you have to do just that little extra bit.
Yeah.
Like, I wonder if there's that aspect to it too.
Well, I know people who will tell you their deepest, darkest secrets within 5 minutes of meeting you. And it's because they want to know right then, are you going to reject me because of this? Because I've been rejected about this before.
Right.
And it almost feels like a filmic version, like, if you're not into this, fuck off, like kind of a thing.
Yeah. Anyways, to get back slightly more on track to Showgirls, although this was all related to Showgirls, because Showgirls is very like, are you going to like me? you're either gonna like me or you're not gonna like me.
Yeah.
And
if you object to boobs, leave now.
I loved all of it, and I loved how out there it is. And there's a really violent, and again, spoilers, I think I mentioned this earlier, but there's a violent rape scene, later, and it's like, it feels, it's hard to watch because it's so bad. And especially with, again, the last couple of years have been very focused on sort of women and women's place in society, and like seeing a rape scene is really, but like the scene isn't, like the whole point is like, it's really bad, like bad people are doing it, it's really bad. Like this is the opposite side of like, this is like the opposite side of what the positives, there's a positive thing in the film, and this is like the negative thing.
Right.
Maybe it goes too far, I don't know.
Right, well, I don't think you find the movie completely devoid of problems. You're not saying.
Well, and it is also, it's like, it's the black friend that this happens to, and it's like the black characters in the film aren't terrible, but like, you could probably representation could have been maybe done a little better. I don't know. But like, it's like, weirdly, like, and it's like, at first I was like objectionable to that scene, but then I was like, why am I objecting to the violent part of this film when the sex is so out there? Am I doing that opposite thing where I'm suddenly like fine with the outlandish sex, but not with the outlandish violence? So like, there's that weirdness to it too. But to follow up on this, one of the interesting things in You Don't Nomi is that there's critics discussing how Verhoeven what his portrayal of women is, like how it might be misogynistic or negative, and how in Showgirls, like, it's so outlandish and it's so like, it's problematic towards victims. Like, and one of the critics says like, oh, how could a victim ever find this helpful? Like, no victim wants to watch this. And then the very next thing is like, there's an actress who's been doing the theatrical, I think the musical version of Showgirls.
Yeah, she's been doing musical stage performances.
Yeah, and she did the musical version of Showgirls, and she's like, it's so, and then and the next line is something like, oh, it's so cathartic for me to play this. And she was somebody who was, I think she says, raped.
Yeah.
And so it's like, that's where it's like, nobody's a monolithic.
Right.
I get it if we want to object to Verhoeven's work. Like, I get it if we find Tarantino problematic in the way he treats women. We could talk about Kurosawa and how the lack of female roles in his films might be problematic.
Yeah.
And at the same time, Showgirls is cathartic to this person. So I feel like we can't discredit it. We can't just throw it out that way. Like,
right.
Maybe there's something problematic with Verhoeven's work. I haven't seen enough of it to say for sure. I don't know that I really buy into that. Much like I think Tarantino's work is kind of maybe a little problematic, but also there's some really strong women in it. Well,
but at least there's conversations about it. I mean, going again to what Spike Lee and Barry Jenkins were talking about, Spike Lee talked about, like, there's nothing, he doesn't think we shouldn't see Gone with the Wind. It's just when he was a kid, he was just like shown it. And he was just left to be like, what do I make of this? And I think
you want to have a more, this is what streaming gives us, actually. Streaming makes it a lot more capable for us to even have these discussions, because you can show the movie and be like, hey, here's the movie, here's some discussions about the movie. Maybe you should watch this before the movie just to understand some of its placement.
Right. But also, I think, and now I know you want to cut these videos up, but I feel like this is just one long discussion that we're going to want to wrap up pretty soon.
We'll see.
But one of the things we were just talking about was diversity of and inclusivity of voices. And that is where, you want, movies that say other things, so that you have them all out there, know, so that we don't, I mean, that's the weird thing about Showgirls is it is the only NC-17 wide release film. There are not that many other films like it, and it would be interesting to see, but I don't think that's going to happen. But
I mean, in my dreams maybe, but one of the reasons I like going to foreign films is because there's a more free, not necessarily like in terms of like, plenty of foreign films don't necessarily grapple with the subjects of like LGBTQIA or like the black body versus the white body, the Asian body versus, it's not like that. But
Russian cinema is not producing a lot of those, for example.
No, but like I go there because you are more likely to find a little bit less like puritanical sort of feelings about sex. So like, not always, But
depends on the cinema. I mean, it depends on the country. It depends on how their funding works. It depends on whether someone's smuggling their movie on a USB key in a cake. Depends on stuff like that.
Shout out to Shafar Panahi, I think is his name.
I don't think that movie was about sexuality at all, but he's been he's been put under house arrest by Iran for what his movies are
Iran,
about.
Not many of their Iran films are probably going to cover this, but cover sexuality that way. But maybe French films.
Mainstream Iranian cinema. I mean, that's true. I don't always know how many people within, that the country the film is coming from actually are watching.
Right. Well, like Rafiki was banned, I think, in Nigeria, right? I think it's Nigerian, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not 100% sure, but I've definitely seen several cases like that where it's like, here's X country, a film from X country.
Yeah.
They didn't screen it there.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't.
Anyways, bringing it back to Showgirls and You Don't Nomi. I really like Showgirls and You Don't Nomi, and it was interesting.
Yeah,
and
I loved You Don't Nomi because I do love a movie a documentary that shows that there is multiple ways of viewing things, and Room 237 did that, and I think LA Plays Itself does that. I think stuff like that, and You Don't Nomi also showed that.
Yeah.